Hey guys, welcome to Jerry's Live. As always, I'm your host, Amy Gardner-Dean. Today's episode, we are doing JL 156 water mixable oils. And we always have lots of people who have tons of questions about water mixable oils. What makes them different? Are they really oils? Is it something that you need to, when you exhibit your work, call them water mixable oils, all that. So you're going to be learning about the medium through a demo today using LUKAS Berlin water mixable oils. So we have done 2 other episodes in the past, and I'll try to remember during the episode to specify those. When you watch our episodes, at the top of kind of the description, you can hit show more. That will give you 2 different links. One is all of our shows in chronological order. If you are one of those people that likes to binge watch, then you can watch it from start to finish. If you are really interested in specific topics only, under water mixable oils, in that category, it's going to show you, after tonight, obviously 3 episodes, but 2 other episodes that we've already done prior. One is JL 41. That was water-soluble oils. An episode where we went through every single brand that Jerry's Artorama carried at that time. I'm not sure if we've gained or lost any sense, but every brand we did a small little painting with each one, so we kind of could talk about, just as I did each one, I noticed some differences between them, so we talked about those and gave you just a little bit of information on all those different brands. So that episode was JL 41. We also did an episode JL 92, and that one was Water Mixable Oils Intro to Solvent-Free Painting. Because with water mixable oils, the clue is in the name. You can use water to thin them. You don't want to use water to thin them too much to paint with them. So as we do this demo today, I'll actually make some of those mistakes that I hear a lot of people kind of chronically when they're new. Maybe they've been taught in traditional oils wrong to use mineral spirits to just, make your paints down into a wash. That's going to give you more problems with water mixable oils, and we'll talk about why kind of as we go. So what we're going to be using today, we'll go over that really quick and then we'll get started, and I will talk about the oils while we're working, and the girls can shoot questions to Katie to ask. They're still doing it remotely, so we can social distance as much as possible here in the studio. We're going to be using this LUKAS Berlin water mixable oils cute little suitcase set of 8. It's just so adorable. This one is down because I've got the list of the paints and actually used some of these to put in the palette. The colors that this comes with, 8 37 milliliter tubes. Let's read the English version because I'm not the best with German. Titanium white, cadmium yellow light hue, lemon yellow, cadmium red deep hue, cyan blue, which is your primary blue, viridian hue, which is a phthalo green, burnt umber, and ivory black. So those will be all those. And actually, I didn't realize it at the time because I didn't pull back the plastic. It comes with a paintbrush actually in it. So that's kind of nice. So you can order that set and you've already got a nice little round to be able to use with that. So it's a good introduction set if you're kind of looking to get into water mixable oils. It's going to give you enough colors to, be able to start out with in a cute little kind of convenient carry set for them. We have got water in one of the silicoil brush basins, so it's easy for me to actually clean the paint out of my brush as we work. We've got Berlin's water mixable, their linseed oil that's been modified to be water mixable, okay? So we'll use that more as we want to thin the colors, then we'll use water because it keeps kind of that oil content higher, so the paint paste is going to be more durable and bond better. We're going to be using the Vinci dual-sided Pro panels that we talked about in our episode last week. They are a thick 1/4 inch panel instead of an 1/8 inch wood panel. One side has a very smooth gesso finish. The other side has kind of a medium textured finish. We're going to be using the medium side to it, but it's great because you can do 2 different paintings, one on each side. if you like, especially good for practicing, things like that. And then brushes. We've got some of the Berlin synthetic brushes, which I think are perfect for water mixable oils. The problem with this is kind of where I part ways in what I say for me is a preference with water mixable oils compared to traditional oils. Oil brushes are oil brushes either way you stack it. Both the natural brushes like Hog and things like that can be used with water mixable, same as your regular traditional oils. What I don't like about using especially hog bristle brushes with water instead of solvents is hog bristle can like pull up water and become really big and thick and kind of it expands. They get big, they get unwieldy, they get squashy. It bloats up. Yeah. It's like when you go to a cookout and eat too many hot dogs, how you feel, that's what the brush paint's like.
I was going to say overcooked hot dog,
Yeah.
but that works too.
So a synthetic brush, actually for water mixable oils, does one of two really great things. It's not going to bloat up like that when you paint with it. The Berlin are a hog bristle style synthetic white brush. Then we also have the Staccato Creative Mark brushes that have kind of this really pretty brindling. Those are a perfect brush for doing, you know, acrylics or water mixable oils. So neither of these are going to swell because they're synthetic. The beauty of them is when you go to clean the brushes, because these are designed for acrylic painting, right? And we all know acrylic gets into natural hair brushes and just wrecks them. Guess what? Doesn't do that with synthetic. So what is a water mixable oil going to do on something that's a little bit more of a slippery surface? It's going to clean so much easier. If you've ever tried to wash water mixable oil out of a traditional hog hair brush, I'm telling you, you better bring some elbow grease to the party because that's what it's going to take. I have actually been known to use water mixable oils and go clean the brushes in solvent before I use soap. Just at the end of the painting process because it's really hard for me to get it out otherwise. So synthetic brushes, it comes off really cleanly. You should not have to use that type of elbow grease for those. So that's why we're going to showcase these, that they work really nicely with it. Last item we've got, besides just the easels that we use all the time, the Soho aluminum folding easels. This is the Soho Urban Artist Mixed Media Palette. The beauty of this is everybody's always asking, can I put my oils in the freezer to keep them from drying? This is where you definitely don't want to do this because these are water mixable, okay? You're going to not have good luck with that. You're going to destroy this. It's got a, forgot that I put the oil in there. Can you switch to the side camera just so they can see this? I don't want to mix my oil. Okay, I'm going to put this back here because I know he focused on that. Okay, so I've got my colors in this. It's got nice deep wells. It's got a big mixing area here. It's got a sponge I can wet down. This keeps it nice and moist in here. It's got a rubberized seal. So I can even put, I've even got my my modified linseed oil in there so that it's ready to go. The gasket there seals that up nice and tight, airtight. So this is going to stay nice and humid. It's going to make those oils last way longer between painting sessions. As soon as you're done painting for the day, go, or if you're going to take a break and you know it's going to be like 20 minutes, 30 minutes plus, go ahead and seal that up. It keeps those paints nice and crisp. You'll be able to use those way longer. So it's a handy little palette. Or if you go to classes and you've got to transport stuff back and forth, it's got a gasket. It's not going to dump in your car. Okay? So those are the items we're going to be using today. I am going to just go ahead and start kind of painting on this as I talk. So I want you to shoot questions kind of at any time that you think something is relevant, or, you know, I know we'll have people that may have missed some of kind of jumping on at first. So, and I'm already green. I'm not sure how I did that. It's usually orange. Today, clearly, Viridian. Okay. I think it was.
I know how you did.
Why are we surprised? Ever. Yeah, I don't know. It must have been in the gasket. All right. That's fine. All right. So if you're just joining us, we're doing water mixable oils. We've already given the set contents If you go use the keyword JL156 and you go to the jerrysartorama.com website, you plug that in, it'll pull up that set in the tech notes. It's going to tell you what colors are there. So you can either rewatch at the beginning once this restarts to get those colors, or the tech notes are the really easy way to go. All right, so water mixable oils are there's two different types, okay? There is modified linseed, where they actually modify the linseed at the molecular level when they make the paint, grind the pigment with that modified oil just as they would, you know, making traditional paint, put it in the tube, and then there you go. So it's already modified right at the oil level. So from the get-go, that's what you're going to be dealing with. Holbein makes their paint like that. Most water mixable oils are actually, it's oil paint, traditional oil paint, that has a surfactant in it, okay? What that surfactant does, surfactant is what? A soap. So think about that it's like a detergent that plays well with oil paints. Once you add water, it activates that. It helps break up those molecules just enough where it makes cleanup really easy, so you can get the paint out of your brush and the oil out of your brush. But when it's dry, that surfactant evaporates and it's gone from the painting, and you're left with just an oil paint, okay? So if you're somebody who's concerned about, okay, but if I say this is an oil painting at a gallery, or, you know, I'm entering a show or whatever, do they need to know, is this less archival? This is oil paint, regardless of, it's still an oil vehicle. The surfactant is the only difference in a paint like this, or the modification. So it's still, once it's dried, an oil painting. So you don't have to say squat about it. It's just an oil painting. Always go with oil painting, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start kind of ghosting this in. When Katie, I think we're having a bit of a technical issue. She walked off, so once she's back, we'll switch to the side camera. That's fine. What I'm going to do at first.
Found an issue on YouTube for.
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that, guys. They're working on it. So what I'm going to do first is what all artists tend to want to do, and it's the way that I was taught in college. So I understand. If I was in this camp once, folks, that's why I've got that modified linseed oil. They're ready to go to kind of thin the color if I need it. Everybody always wants to add too much solvent, right? So I'm going to do what most people do, and I'm going to add. Push this over here so we can see it. Too much water to my paint in the background. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit of this brown. What about? What? Oh yeah, there we go. I'm going to kind of make this. This is a pretty like little kind of cinnamony color in the background. So you can see this really looks more like kind of heavier watercolor, or super thin. When I go to put this on, it's hard to see from the side. It's a little foamy. It's got a little bit of white in that. Now, will that disappear as it dries? Yes. Do I want that on my painting though? Is that going to give a really good bond to this for that first layer? It's gonna soak in, but there might be some issues. And when you add that much water and you get that little bit of foaming, it actually can make it so it's really difficult for you to see the color when you're mixing, okay? So I'm gonna take this. This would dry like super fast though. And on this panel, this is some really nice absorbent gesso, Katie.
Is it?
Because it actually is taking it really nice and absorbing it in really nice. But on something like a stretched canvas, where typically those last coats are much more kind of plastic-like, it's going to foam up and potentially cause some issues. So in hindsight, with this panel, you could paint with this, okay, for that first layer.
Canvas to show it on? Do you have a panel?
I'm sure we got one somewhere. Can we use this? First one I grabbed, it's a canvas. This is going to be a really plasticky. Okay. So I've got the same color. We haven't done anything with it. And you've got, can you switch to the above? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's probably hard for them to see straight from above, but I can see that it's kind of foamy, and I can see it sitting there in comparison to that canvas. That canvas really, see if I do that, if it'll, still kind of having some problems focusing. That canvas really absorbed it. This is absorbing it some, but I see it kind of whiter than it should be for what a regular paint would be. Yeah, and it's kind of a little, because that's a little bit foamy, that's that surfactant. So this, if I let this dry and I went to wipe it, see how much more I can wipe off? It really stained that, that gessoed the Da Vinci panel really nicely. Too much of that comes off. So if I'm able to wipe that much off and it didn't absorb because it's a lot more, got a lot more plasticizers in it for that gesso, that is going to be a problem. And not all, I mean, some, if you've got a really good quality professional acrylic prime canvas, it's probably not going to be as bad because it's going to kind of be that nice balance of slightly absorbent, but the paint's going to sit on top. This did not work well. So if you know that you use more value series canvases and stuff like that, you're going to not want to thin this down very much with the water. Okay, so what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take this paint, and actually, if you show it from above, I just realized you can really see the, if you can see that color, could you zoom into that? To right there. See how light that is, where that water is? That's where the surfactant's starting to work. That shouldn't be that light. Can you see that difference? See how much lighter that color is? That's that surfactant activating. That's what I was talking about when it gets white when you add a lot of water. Okay, it's not that really nice dark burnt umber anymore. It's gotten really light. That's more like a really light burnt sienna, or even like a, I don't know, like a more reddish raw sienna. So that's what that is with getting too much water in there. Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to do kind of what I was doing before. I'm going to mix my paint, but I'm not going to add the water. Make the color that I want. I'm adding that lemon yellow. I'm adding some of the red and the burnt sienna, and I'm going to add just a touch. I'm just touching my brush in there of that oil. Now that's not making it really, see how much darker this was than that other one was? Putting this on. See how I didn't lose the color? That was not that dark when I first started, was it? When I did the other one, Katie. That's because that surfactant hasn't lightened that kind of color to it.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Big difference. It's acting more like an oil paint does on here than kind of like an acrylic. I can feel the grab like it should be with oil paint. I can feel, you see how the kind of the, it's not completely transparent, but it's not, you know, it's kind of semi-transparent, where you can see kind of those overlays where that transparency is kind of touching. This is more what you want to see for good painting practices, for good adherence from layer to layer, okay? That's what you're wanting to see, because if that something gets scratched or whatever off that first layer that you did, I wiped it off, so it's fine now. But if something gets scratched off that first layer that didn't adhere very well, you know, you bump it. Yeah, that's how you get scratches in your painting, is when you don't have really good layers that bond. Some layers will lift and just kind of pull off. Okay, so that's what I think one of the biggest things that's really hard for somebody to learn, especially that came from oil paints and that was taught kind of improper painting techniques where you just, you know, use that mineral spirits and you just wash it down so thin. And that same types of thing will happen with mineral spirits as well if you use too much of them. If you use too much turpentine, if you use too much of any solvent, it's breaking down that molecular bond in your oil. This is called water-soluble because you clean your brushes with water and with soap. It's not water-soluble because you should be always adding. You can add a little bit of water just to make, you know, instead of this thickness of the paint straight out of the tube, to make it so that it's kind of a thinner, more workable paste. There's a difference with what's considered a workable paste and with just like absolutely drowning it. Do we have any questions?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so far. Go ahead and.
I was waiting for you.
That's fine.
Let's see. We've had a couple people ask about disposal of the water. Do you have to dispose of it certain ways, like where you're rinsing your brush and things like that?
Okay, so the best thing you can do with the water is how you really should dispose of acrylics, and most people don't know about that either. Take a dump bucket. If you don't paint a lot or don't go through a lot of water with your water mixable oils or acrylics, you can use a smaller one, but if you work a lot, use like a 5-gallon pail with a lid. Dump that water in there and then let it, just the water evaporate. So the solids will sink to the bottom and then they can be scraped out and it can be taken, that part can be taken to somewhere for recycling. Okay. You should be doing that with acrylics too. That should not be going down the sink. You know, try to get, whenever you're painting, try to take your rag and get as much of that kind of debris out before you even start putting it in the water so that you're getting minimal amounts that are going down, you know, into there. It'll save, so you can actually use that water for longer, right? But it'll also save the amount that you're having to, you know, go through to clean constantly.
Next question.
Yes. Go ahead.
Can you reiterate what you're using as a medium?
The only thing that I'm using is, Berlin makes multiples of this types of stuff, okay? So this is a this is a modified linseed oil. So it's got the surfactant in the linseed oil. So it's like what your traditional linseed oil would be that you would use with oil painting, but it's got that surfactant in it so that you can add that little bit of water to thin it, and it's going to be able to be cleaned out when you clean your brush. They make a quick dry painting medium. I would only use that if you are like, let's say you live in Florida and it takes forever when you're painting to dry. That is the only time I would use that quick dry painting medium. I tried using it once outside. A bunch of us from work went plein air painting, and literally it was tacking up on the canvas as I was painting on the painting.
That's impressive here.
Well, but it was
But not in
like,
a good way, like, yeah.
But the problem was, okay, so it's tacking up, which is like, wow, this is great. I'll be able to put another layer on it. But it wasn't where I could put another layer on it right away, right? So like 20 minutes later, I'm going to paint over it, and it's tacky enough where it's stuck and it's drying, but that little bit of moisture adding to it is like pulling it, like, and I scrub, which is just me, and I know that that's a problem, but it was picking it up. So it was like, the modified linseed oil was better for what I was doing, to add enough to make it brushable and a stronger paint film, but not where it was, you know, giving me problems. There's also a stand oil.
That was the next question. The difference between linseed and stand oil. Stand
oil is where generally it's been modified either by thickening in the sun, that's sun thickened linseed oil, or thickened with heat, right? It's started to emulsify, it's cooked, so that drying has already started. But then it makes it super thick and super syrupy, which then, if combined with paint, sometimes, and then if you paint really heavy or put extra amounts in it, it makes this ridiculous gloss, which is gorgeous. I did that with a painting that I was doing water with a boat, and it was, now granted where it was kept was very humid, but 6 months later I was putting fingerprints in it. So, but I also don't use stand oil for those reasons, because I know how long that takes for that enamel-like finish to dry. So unless you're somebody that does trompe l'oeil and stuff like that, and you're adding little bits as you work, you really want to save that for your final layers of your painting, and it needs to be where you're doing that, you know, knowing that it's going to take some dry time. It was not pretty. And it has a thumbprint to this day because I couldn't figure out how to get it out of it. I was not very good at hiding it. Do you have other? Okay.
Two kind of drying questions. They
Okay.
kind of go. How long do they last in that sealed pallet, and how fast kind of do they dry on the compared to in comparison to regular oils? What's the drying time?
Okay, so water mixable oils dry. I mean, LUKAS 1862 oils dry to the touch in 2 to 5 days for most colors, right? Just as a traditional oil paint. These can generally be dry enough where you can be painting on them the next day. Most of it should be dry to the touch if you've not used like the stand oil and things like that. However, everyone's own environment for humidity or, things like that is going to be very different. So there's no way for me to know. If you know you live in a humid environment, yay, your paint's gonna probably stay longer in a container like this where you put a little bit of water in it. But as far as, drying, I don't know, it could dry faster, it could dry slower. It's something where you're just gonna have to experiment with it. But typically, water mixable oils, because of just kind of that modification process, tend to dry faster than the traditionals. Especially with the quick dry painting medium. That stuff was like, I'd never been so excited and then like so crushed at the same time that it was like actually working against me and how fast I like stuff to dry.
Can you push the palette up just a tiny bit? I've got it in just like up a little bit. I've got it in the picture so they can kind of see.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
let's do this.
perfect.
Let's move these down. Okay.
They were asking to see it.
Yeah, and as this starts to work, if it starts to feel like it's tacking up, which like earth tones are going to dry faster, I'll let you know. I would expect that this part is going to, I can see some of it turning matte already, so I think that it'll probably dry pretty quickly. Like, since it's those lower layers, I've added a little bit of water, right? And then a little bit of that modified oil. I'm trying to be good about, I know my
I mean, somebody on
folders.
YouTube was asking, do they feel lush in the same way that oil paints do? They're just oil paints with the surfactant added, so.
They're oil paints with the surfactant added, but so they're going to feel different, right? When we tested all those brands, the Holbein felt the most normal, depending on who kind of adds the most surfactant. These felt pretty good. These feel, and especially there was an old LUKAS, if you use the old LUKAS Berlin, and this is night and day difference. This stuff paints very much like a traditional oil in comparison to that. That just didn't, it worked, but it just wasn't the same. This is much more a traditional oil feel compared to what their kind of original formula had once been. Now, some of the other brands, and I think we talk about that on that episode, so I'm not going to go into that because it was also like 60 or 70 episodes ago, so I don't really remember all of it as well. We're very oily, very sticky feeling. It just, there was a lot of difference between them. So I would definitely, that episode was JL41. I would definitely look that episode up if you're wanting to learn more about kind of water mixables as a whole, because I think that it would be beneficial to like kind of hear firsthand. Those were all painted within the week of each other so that I would remember and be able to give really good feedback about them. Now I'm patting my brush in the water just to pick up. I'm not like scooping a bunch of water out. I'm just touching it like you would if you're kind of touching a solvent, just with the corner of your brush or a little bit of linseed oil, just to help make that kind of thinned out a little rather than just like the fat straight out of the tube. I don't want it quite that fat and thick.
Do you know about when they changed the formula?
I want to say it was right, not that far before that show. It like within that year, which would have been, what was that year? Probably 2018. Sounds right.
Yeah.
I want to say that we had a lot of the old colors for a good long while, and we might even still have a few, because I know that when we would buy the LUKAS, we would buy a lot, but they're on a separate page on the website. Mm-hmm. So people that have the old ones, that like the old ones, can still get some of the colors. At least I know within probably 4 months ago I saw it when I was looking for something on the website. So, and the page came up, but it's been a while. Yeah, 2018 sounds right. Because I did a little video with them to talk about the handling characteristics of the new ones, and I want to say that's when it was. Can't believe it's been not that long. Like, it seems like
forever ago, but
3 weeks ago, yeah. And clearly that wasn't 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Can you mix regular oils and water mixable oils?
Okay, so this is where it gets tricky. There is, and I don't know how much of it we have left, because it's something that was going to be discontinued. LUKAS makes a medium number 5, and it's not on the water mixable page. It's on the LUKAS oil mediums page. That mixable, that oil, is a modification oil that you can add to traditional oil colors to make them water mixable. Okay, so which means, what did we say? Clean up. It makes them so you can clean them with soap and water. Now, for some people that they like the idea of the water mixables, not to have to use the solvent and things like that, but maybe you've got a whole bunch of oils, there's other things you can do to clean brushes that don't involve solvent. I know of people, Mike Rooney uses vegetable oil. Strangest thing you ever heard, just regular like canola oil, has a bucket. He cleans the brush really good after he uses that, but he does not want to use solvent. So he just uses the paint, he uses some linseed oil to thin it. Because that canola is an oil, you bump it in there, it helps take the stuff out. Now, it's not a drying oil though, so you wouldn't want to use that, clean out your brush with that, then stick it right back in your paint, because that's going to transfer onto your canvas. It's not a drying oil, so it's going to give you problems. It's not going to be archival. I look like a tomato. I had an injection yesterday for my knee, and for some reason I look like a tomato today, and the color, I'm sure, is not helping, but I just noticed that, and that's scary. So there are ways around that, right? You can choose not to use solvents, choose not to use alkyds, use linseed oil for thinning your paint only, not any solvents, not any even mineral spirits, odorless products like that, and still continue to paint with oil paints, okay? And you can wash out with soap and water the brush as long as you've used some sort of thinning agent, like a canola oil, like a vegetable oil. There's some people that use walnut oil. Walnut oil is still a drying oil, though. I mean, I guess you could use that to thin if you were then wanting to use that paintbrush again before you actually cleaned it out. So you're not limited to, you can only use this, or you can only use that. There's the modification product that they make, that medium number 5, so you can kind of marry those two. Now, I think you can't use more than 40% of that mixture with the oils, okay? Or no, I'm sorry, maybe it's if you're using your oil, regular traditional oils, and you're using water mixable oils, you can't use more than 40% of the traditional oils. So they can be used together, but I'm telling you, there is a slight difference in the two. So I think it would feel really weird if you don't kind of add that water mixable capability to it first to kind of unify them. So it's something that you would definitely want to play with. And something to consider is that water mixable lines, other than Holbein, don't have, like the brands that make them, don't carry as many water mixable colors typically as all of their oil paints, because with that water kind of, with putting a surfactant in, it doesn't play well with some particular pigments, right? Holbein has, I think, their whole line in oils and water mixables, but their oil is modified first. Okay, so that's different between the two. But I mean, how many of us really use if a color line, if you like Charvin, you paint with Charvin, do you really use all 200 and however many tubes? You don't, right? So they've used the ones that you need, that you know, are the colors that are popular colors. I need to put a shadow in here. What other questions do you have?
Can you use the fat over lean technique with these paints?
These are still oils, right? Good question, because that's something that you need to know. So they're water mixable in that they clean up like a water mixable. You still have to adhere to fat over lean. The paint doesn't know any different, right? And so it's not like, I'm water mixable, I'm dandy, I don't have to follow your silly rules. You need to still do fat over lean. So the more, you know, either out of the tube itself, where you're painting just with the thick paint, that's obviously fatter than if you're thinning it down with a little water and a tiny bit of the linseed oil. If you're adding a lot more linseed oil, or then you're adding stand oil, which is super fat, that's your fatter. So same fat over lean principles are going to apply. It's a good question.
We do have a couple of people that keep asking what the difference between the water mixable and mixable.
It's just the same thing. Mixable, I think, is the German term. It's just how the Europeans term it. We say mixable, they say mixable.
Yeah.
So yes, or soluble. It's all the same thing. It's just whoever wants to have the fancier looking, I guess, adoptive word. I don't know. All the same thing. Water mixable, water soluble, mixable. All the same.
If you're us around the studio.
Yeah, mixable. So, and the paints are going to perform the same. If you add certain colors to take heat out of the paint, again, these are just oil paints that have a modification in the paint itself where they add a surfactant that makes it so that it's easy to clean out of a brush. And you can see this is actually really clean for, you know, because they're synthetic. That's why I like them with water mixables, because it really comes out with that little beater in the bottom of the silica oil. I wipe most of the pigment out to start with. It really helps pull that out. You will find that if you use traditional hog bristle brushes, they get kind of gooey, right? In those little pores in the hair because it's not synthetic. So that's kind of the beauty of the synthetic brushes to me for this kind of.
We did have a couple, I think a couple people miss it in the very beginning.
Sure. What are we?
Mixable, somebody got it right.
The
mixable, you don't pronounce the C.
No, but it looks like mixable.
It does. A couple people who missed it in the beginning when you were explaining why you like the brushes that you do, or recommend the brushes that you do for.
Okay, so we talked in the beginning about that these are traditional oils, so you can use traditional oil brushes. However, we talked about because you can thin these a little bit with water instead of kind of dipping your brush into solvent, that traditional, especially hog bristle brushes, become bulky and unwieldy, in Katie's term, which I love, bloated. So they become very difficult to use in the same way. So a synthetic brush, synthetics have really changed a lot. The one thing that synthetics don't have that natural hair brushes have are those little pores along the hair shaft that kind of capture in these little pockets, capture the pigment and then lay it down later, right? If you've got a lot of water though, instead of solvent doesn't do the same thing to the brush. Water just bloats that up and makes it a big puffy mess. These don't do that. You put it in water, it doesn't really change the fact, it just dampens it, right? So it works where it's going to perform the same until you go to clean the brush out. When you clean the brush out, you wipe most of the pigment out. That synthetic bristle, whatever type of synthetic bristle that it is, these are stiffer to be designed to perform more like a stiffer brush like a hog hair. It doesn't have those little pores for all that stuff to get captured. And if you've ever used water mixable oils and you've used a hog bristle brush, there is all this silty goo in the brush. Just because it can be thinned with water and painted with water doesn't mean that it cleans easily. And those traditional hair brushes do not clean as easily as a synthetic. Synthetic cleans super easy, super fast. You're not sitting there washing it in the sink 2, 3, 4 times trying to get that stuff out. Synthetic brush, if you're in a pinch and you're in a class, you can use something like a Dawn dishwashing liquid and it's not going to kill your brush. It's really better to still use a traditional brush soap if you've got it, but in a pinch, that's not going to damage a synthetic bristle brush. It is going to strip and ruin a natural hair brush. So that's kind of why that's a perfect brush for this type of thing, and just kind of good all around workhorse brush if your painting kind of conditions change. Workshops, wherever, where you may not have your normal facilities for cleanup and things like that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Are they less toxic than traditional oils?
Okay, I think only Holbein makes the cadmium, the true cadmiums, the true cobalts. They do the same colors in their traditional line in their water mixable line. Most of these other manufacturers, I think all of them, only use AP certified pigments. So it takes kind of that guesswork out. If you've got a cadmium, especially with the LUKAS water mixables, if you've got a cadmium, it is a hue. It is not a straight up cadmium, because just they know. I mean, and they, being water mixable people, just like somebody asked the good question about how do you what do you do with the water when you're done painting? A lot of people don't think about it and just dump it down the sink. Still don't do that, please. But this isn't going to, if you accidentally forget, you're not killing all your local wildlife and fauna and things like that down the river. So,
for somebody who is familiar with the LUKAS 1862,
mm-hmm.
in terms of pigment saturation, how do they match up?
These are very highly pigmented. I've always been pretty impressed by the 1862 and how they perform they use the same pigment, okay? And probably the same oil or a very similar linseed oil, just the oil is modified. So you're not, if you're used to their cyan blue, this is their cyan blue. They're not switching the pigments up on you. I mean, if you're concerned about it before you buy the specific color, look at the tech notes, see if it's the same pigment that's on your 1862. It's usually on, I think, the back of the tube. Let's check that. Side of the tube. So it's going to say. So, just double check. But I am pretty sure it's consistent with the rest of their line. And it feels, again, very similar, other than that modified, surfactant in it just has a slight stick to it in comparison when it's thinned down. When it's not, you're using it straight up like the regular oil, it feels pretty similar. What other questions do we?
We do have a couple more questions people were asking about storing them specifically on the palette. We've heard a couple of people mention putting them in the freezer, or what to do to, if you're just doing it temporarily.
You don't want to anytime. I know that there's old school painters and stuff that say to do that. There can be problems with some brands with freezing and thawing the pigment, okay? And since these have a surfactant in it, you probably want to try it with a few small pieces. If you're just one of those people that just has to freeze your paint for some crazy reason, it's better to cover them and keep them in a cool place that that has, you know, a reasonably, I guess, decent humidity in comparison to, you know, because that's going to slow that drying rate down. But covering it is the key, right? Because this, like this, winging it around, has lots of oxygen that's going to start that oxidization of the oil vehicle, okay? If I cover that, that's limiting how much oxygen is coming in there and starting that process. Putting that little sponge in there, dampening it and putting it in there is going to kind of help keep the humidity locked in there. So it's going to, it might skin up on top a little bit, but it's going to keep it longer than if you just had it sitting out on a wood pallet. So I really can't stress enough that how freezing paint is just really not the best idea long term. It can affect the performance, you know, and the old paint that your grandmother used to freeze like that is very different than, you know, some of those brands weren't the best quality to start with. So I'm very reluctant to encourage people to freeze their paint. There's not a reason to. If you know you tend to put way too much paint out, you can put small amounts out or only get the color out that you need when you actually need it. There's no rule that says you have to put out a crap ton of paint like I do. I do because I don't know how fast I'm going to paint. I don't know what colors I'm going to use when I start, and so I would rather have it there than to keep stopping when I'm doing a demo for you guys.
You're in the zone.
And this isn't my paint, so I can use extra. At home, I'm not going to put out a whole bunch of paint that I might, you know, not need and then not be able to get to. So that's...
We have no shortage of paint in the studio.
No, so that's, and people get very angry, and I understand, but I'm not going to anyone's house and taking the paint from them and using it. So,
well, and we have backups if you happen to
yes,
run out of a color that's, you know,
we have lots. It's just when you're filming, you've got to have stuff already prepped to save time so that we can help you guys as much as possible while we are here during the hour. Okay, so it's not done for any other reason than that. Other questions?
Somebody was asking about, Karen was asking about priming. Do they work on all canvases that oils well? I'm assuming that means about the...
She might mean oil primed.
Oil primed, yeah.
This is still an oil. Like we've said, there's only either a surfactant added or the oil is modified. Still an oil. You can use it on any surface. With an oil primed surface, you just want to remember, use your modified linseed oil, then add a whole bunch of water to thin it like we did at the beginning. This was much more absorbent, right? This was a nice kind of thirsty textured gesso. An oil primed surface is going to be very close particled, okay? It's going to be very smooth. It's going to be very impermeable. Oil sits on top of it. So you don't want to use a lot of water because that's like mixing water and oil and doesn't work well, right? So make sure that you're taking that into consideration and adding that linseed oil to your paint to thin it for your first layers.
And to kind of go along with that, well, accoutrement, I guess, people are also asking about varnishing.
Varnishing, you can varnish this with it's... And I know that this seems incredulous, and that's why a lot of people ask a lot of these questions at first, because it doesn't seem like this would make sense. If you can use water with it, surely it's not a real oil. This is still an oil. You can use any oil varnish you like. Some of the companies are really smart in preying on the uninformed, right? And do water mixable varnishes. Just use a regular oil varnish if you've got it. Now, I mean, if you don't want to use it because it's got the solvents in it, I understand, okay? Because if the solvents are really an issue for your health, maybe that water mixable varnish is better. But you can use any varnish that you've got that will work for traditional oils. So that's not a, oh my gosh, you know, it's 3 in the morning and this painting is done. I'm going to have to wait till the store opens to go get a water mixable varnish. If you've got other ones, you don't.
We do have a couple people, and it's not specifically a question, but we have had a lot of people commenting on the smell and how that they're not as potent, I guess, as regular oils are to them. They've had less problems with allergies and stuff with them.
It depends on what.
I can't smell those.
Okay, so all companies' oils smell different.
Right.
Whether it's water mixable or not. You can't smell these, which is funny, but you know me and smells. I can smell these, and
right.
To me, it's got an edge to it that the brands of oils that I use at home don't. But the brands of oils I use at home are like Old Holland, where there's lots of pigment, very little oil. Yeah. You add the oil to it to thin it out, right? It's just more concentrated pigment in the tube. So the oils I use are very, specifically, and I use some of the Chelsea stuff, so it's got that lavender in it because I do use a small amount of solvents. So it goes brand by brand. Some of those water mixables were like that Cobra one. I just remember having to open my office door because it was like, it smelled like a fish market. It did. I'm not gonna lie. It had an odor
fish oil,
to it.
Yeah.
It's not fish oil though. It's what the. And I was like, what the heck? I mean, maybe how they modified it was just something that was stronger, but
I guess
good God, it was. People were walking by going, what are you doing in there? So there, some of them some oils of traditional and water mixable do smell very different than others. So that's, if you're sensitive to smells, you may but you really would like to change to water mixable, good for you. That's not a problem. You may want to buy some different tubes of brands that kind of you're considering and see how what you think of the smell of them.
Or visit your local Jerry's Artarama.
Yes, if you are lucky and have one there, that's even better. You can sniff the paint to your heart's desire. Well, but the only thing is we don't have a lot of water mixable brands there, right?
No, that's true. Well, depends on the store.
Right, but I mean, they don't have like...
They don't have every single one.
They don't have like 8 or 9 brands, whatever it was that we tested. So, that's just buy the Series 1. I mean, you could even just do white or something.
Yeah. Because
it's going to smell, however it's modified, it's going to smell. Then if you are only using it for white, you might either be able to stand it, to keep it, or it's a Series 1 if you throw it away or give it to someone, it's not as big of a deal.
Yeah. Or if you're part of our Facebook group too, we have so many different artists who use so many different things in there.
Somebody may be able to point you in the right direction.
Smell affiliation as you.
Yes, so. Definitely. Yeah, talk to some people. If you've met people that do water mixable and you liked their work, or you have questions for them, usually artists are very happy to help give you information, share their experiences of materials with you. That's usually not a problem. And so you can see on this does stick in the white. It stains the white a little bit versus the staccato. You really can't see the paint in with that darker hair. I mean, that'll come out with washing, but that's how you can see that, it's not all going to come out.
Yeah. But as long as it does at some point stick to the filament of the hair and not.
No, it does. And especially, I was using blue. Blue's one of your colors that tends to really stick in a brush, That's harder to get out, so.
Another question. If painting on oil paper, do I need to use a little linseed oil instead of a little water with these, or what would you suggest?
You can use a little bit of, just a slight.
Not too much.
If you're just thinning the paint film, like I am, so that it's not straight out of the tube, you can use a little bit of water. Are you using it to make it like a watercolor using too much water, or are you starting to see that kind of milky whiteness of the surfactant? That's when you're using too much water. Now, I know this is blue, but I would make this cooler color and then come back with next layers, and I would kind of glaze white over that with some oil once that's dry, just so that it has that kind of cool color under it.
Next question. Oh, they're curious about how much movement is left in the background since you painted earlier. Like how much.
That's what I was just going to. That's a good question. That's what I was just going to test and see up here because I wanted to start making this darker. It's just a little damp. Slightly damp. A little bit's coming off of it, but it's not like just laid down. It's just a little bit on the top. Because, I mean, you can see that it's still under there. Let's see how easy it is to paint something over it with a little bit of linseed oil if it sticks. I just dabbed enough linseed oil to kind of make it stick. So look, you can paint right over that. Even though it's slightly wet to the touch, look how, if I turn my brush on the side, I can lay that color down right over that. Now notice I'm not scrubbing, right? I'm taking it and I'm laying it kind of with that brush almost kind of in a horizontal plane right against the surface, but look at how easily that you can add that. Let's put a little bit more dark in there. So yeah, it's already starting to tack up enough. I mean, and that's, we've been painting what for maybe 35, 40 minutes. So yeah, it's already where I can start, you know, but I also added more of that linseed oil to start with and a little bit of water to make it brushable. So, and it was, again, a decently absorbent primer where it's giving me a little bit of, you know, kind of sticking in there really nicely.
So how long would you think that, I guess it depends on how many layers you put on, but.
I think that the white in here with it, it's kind of always humid in here, and we've been, this is what, day two of, three of rain here. I would think that the white might take 2 days, but I would think that all the earth tones that we've used are probably going to be, by tomorrow morning, I could, you know, reliably paint on it. This layer that I just put on will be a little possibly wetter, but I mean, you can see that that can be laid on there, right? Yeah, so but you know, I mean, pigments still are going to follow whites, and some of your blacks are going to dry the slowest. Cadmium, well, cadmium hues and stuff aren't true cadmium, so they may have different drying times depending on the pigments that they've used for them. But you know, your blacks and natural whites are gonna, or natural blacks and whites are gonna be your slowest drying. It's just the nature of the pigments in them. All right, do we have any last questions? I think we're kind of...
I think everything else?
The girls may have been able to...
Yeah.
To catch and... Okay. So this just gives you a little bit of information and kind of answers some of those questions about kind of, you know, how this works. You can see that it can, I mean, it's virtually indistinguishable other than a little bit of a texture difference, other than, you know, it doesn't smell like the traditional oil brand I use, but very few things do. So it's going to be like oil painting. You're painting without having to deal with solvents, with potentially getting it on your skin and absorbing. You know, odorless mineral spirits are the worst in that you can't tell that stuff is there. It's not until you reach a critical level of that being around you constantly and start to have severe health problems that you're going to realize that, that wasn't good for you. So this is really made, especially for people that have health concerns, but even people that, this is going to be gentler on the environment. This is kind of better for health and life in general, as long as you're disposing of it properly, like you would with regular oils. But you're not going to have to also go to the, solid waste with your canned stuff, or it's not going to be flammable if you've got, crazy issues in your studio and stuff like that. So it's something that, to consider, definitely to consider. There's very, very outstanding points about it. And again, it's oil paint just like regular oil paint. It's just been modified to give you the ability to ditch solvents. Okay? All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. Hopefully it's given you a little perspective on water mixable oils. Next week, we have Andrew Cook from Savoir Faire, who's going to be in the studio through Zoom with us. He'll be joining us from California. They, like most vendors, are not doing any travel right now due to COVID, which is fine. We know he always does an excellent job. So he's going to be giving us the history of how cotton watercolor paper is made, how they actually make cotton rag paper. So that's really cool if you're a watercolor artist or you use any type of fine art cotton paper. He'll be showing us a little bit of some Sennelier watercolors with it as he talks about it, and I think we may be using Raphael brushes as well. So, I talked for an hour today planning the episode, so we
love Andrew.
We're good friends, so it's always nice to be able to work with somebody you like. So, all right, so that will be next week. Join us for that, and you guys stay healthy and safe and happy painting. Take care.